have started the recording, and I will now turn off my mic.
Perfect. Hello and welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm Ravi Singh from Demco Software. I'm thrilled to be presenting at the Library 2018 Worldwide Conference. What I'll do is I'll just go through some initial setup things that will allow you to watch this presentation in high fidelity. Why don't I go ahead and do that? So I think we've done this. Really want to thank the founding partners, San Jose State University School of Information, and many thanks go to Sue Allman and Sandy Hirsch for really setting those sites on what possibilities this could be. My thanks also to Steve Hagedon and of course Julie Horwath, who's moderating the session. Feel free to send in your questions. I'll leave some time towards the end to answer them. So let me introduce myself. I'm Ravi Singh. I'm a father, technologist, entrepreneur, reformed library user, and advocate. I've been an early user and advocate of blockchain, really early adopter since about 2007. Investor and advisor to a couple of companies using blockchain technologies. The agenda today is we'll talk a little bit about libraries. I will try to do a little bit of introduction on blockchain, and then we'll talk about the integration of libraries and blockchain, and then we'll end with Q&A. I'm going to turn off the video so you're not distracted by me, and you can focus on the presentation, and I'll turn it on towards the end. So with that, libraries of today are definitely not what the library of yesterday was, right? If you go to a library today, it's a technological cornucopia of options, from makerspace and digital creation labs to things like citizenship, finance, and aging resources for an aging population. They have educational programs and classes, co-working spaces, and business incubators. Essentially, the library is becoming a performance space. It's becoming a place where communities come and gather, and the library gets to show the uniqueness of the communities reflected back in the library. Libraries also have a significant challenge. If you think about today where we are, from being guardians of information to navigating misinformation, right? The information and optionality that we have has created anyone with a modicum of skill in the gift of gab to be able to create. I'm sorry, I think there's a page back up. So the information and optionality we have has created anyone with a modicum of skill in the gift of gab to be able to spread misinformation, rumor, legend, urban legend, spamming, trolling, and a whole cornucopia of things. So in this best of times and the worst of times, what is a library and a librarian to do? And the question is, can blockchain and emerging technology help? Let's find out. So I'm not going to introduce blockchain because that would be taking away from presentations some of my peers have already done. There's been lots of introductory material earlier in this session today. But the key vignettes that I want you to think about is the fact that it's distributed, immutable, verifiable, consensus-driven, and permanent. Let's take a look at what each of these mean very briefly. It's distributed. Everybody has access to it. It's immutable, means it cannot be changed, no matter what. It's verifiable, that means anybody can verify the transaction that happened on the blockchain. And it's consensus-driven, that means we've agreed to a certain body of people agreeing to a certain norm, being able to replicate that data. And it's permanent. It stays forever. This is a really powerful construct from a technology perspective that's available in a much more streamlined and federated manner. So I really like this slide, and every time I show this slide, there's a bunch of people who, blockchain, is it hope or is it hype? And so what I've done is I really like to look at it in two different segments. One is the adoption rate, right? And everybody's very familiar with where the innovation cycle is, where the early adopters are, where the majority of the people start to adopt the technology, where the late majority is, and where the laggards in technology are. And if you look at the sort of the technology trigger or the hype cycle, there's this massive inflection of what a technology can potentially do. Potentially, there's this peak point where it reaches, and then it drops down to this trough of disillusionment, right? There's, oh my God, it's going to solve everything, motherhood and apple pie, that's what we expect. And then we start to really leverage the technology in the best way possible, right? So I think blockchain today is very much at that inflection point in the technology trigger. There's a lot of aspirational things we can do with it. There's a new ways of thinking and approaching and problem solving. We're applying the technology into problem spaces that we wouldn't have normally applied this technology to, and really seeing how it can impact and federate the information in more meaningful ways. Let's look at a few examples. And I've broken the examples to, there's a lot of examples for blockchain, but I've broken it into 4 things that I think are most appropriate in a library setting. There may be others, but these I think are the most appropriate. Provenance. Provenance essentially is the reputability of information and ownership. Can it be applied to supply chain, books, publishing, and essentially fraud reduction? Peer-to-peer, marketplaces, the ability to purchase and lend a book, ability to purchase a book, and sharing economy, the ability to share the book. Libraries are the original sharers. There's a huge plethora of applications being built in the sharing economy, but people forget that the libraries are the original sharers. Digital trust. What does it mean to trust something in terms of identity and integrity? Lastly, auditability in terms of governance and transparency. This is hugely impactful. We talked about the age of misinformation, and the ability to have governance and transparency is very important. There's another set of use cases that is an ever-expanding list today in terms of automation, security, and redundancy. Oh, and one more small thing that can be done on blockchain is Bitcoin. Bitcoin is worth about $131 billion today, and it peaked at about $500 billion a couple of months ago. We have about 500 coins at least of note that have come across or come on board in the last couple of years on leveraging the blockchain technology. Well, that's really nice to hear. The question is, do we, libraries and librarians, need blockchain? So let's look at a simple flowchart that sort of identifies the need. And what I've done is constructed sort of a yes and no question that we can walk through and eliminate use cases and problem statements where we don't need blockchain. The questions are, do we need a database? Does it require shared write accesses? Are writers known and trusted? Do we use a trusted third party? Do we need to control the functionality? Where is consensus determined? And my thinking is libraries need a private blockchain, and that's where this presentation is leading towards, and I will try to bring up an example of a library blockchain. Why do I say that? I think I say that because it's by us, for us. Truth, trust, and technology. We've seen some bad examples of how technology could be used to drive away from trusting information sources. But we can use the same technology to drive awareness, provenance, auditability, accountability, and trust in the information sources. The other thing is it can be vendor agnostic and library driven. And if a collection of libraries got together and started this, they would be able to determine proof of authority to verify all incoming data. So in summation, it's privately written, publicly accessible, and globally understood. This is really powerful. The ability to have transactions that a select libraries or invite-only libraries can write, that is publicly accessible and globally understood, is exceedingly powerful. With that, I want to talk about a simple but obvious example. Today, and this is not the end-all and be-all, but this is just a simple example that we can start on the blockchain from a library perspective that we can expand on to bring other value propositions into the space. So today, imagine, if you will, the ability to take all the library data and library events and putting it into a blockchain. So taking your MOC records and the representation of all bibliographic data and changes that are managed locally by the library could be shared globally. This would be fundamentally really important and very disruptive in the cataloging process and visibility that happens in the library. What I'm really glad to announce is Demco Software is started on this initiative. And we're private. Right now it's invite-only beta, but we have essentially constructed a blockchain that we have built on top of our product as a Discover Local product, where we are starting to take MOC data records and publicize it to the blockchain. And I think this is something really fundamentally important and a practical example, as opposed to talking about the theory of blockchain. It's a real practical example of how blockchain can be fundamentally really important and used in the library space. Again, I'm Ravi Singh, and that's the presentation. Thank you very much all for your time, and I'm here for questions if you have any.
If you have any questions, you can either raise your hand if you know that your microphone is working, or you can type them into the chat box, and we'll approach them that way. Ravi, you have been asked to go back to, oh, you see that. Okay, great.
We're creating great. Kathy asked a question: if blockchain is vendor agnostic, how can Demco create one? What I'm saying is it's vendor agnostic. Anybody can create one. Ours is an example that we want to, with the other folks, create one and provide that as an example so that other folks can use it. I'm going to go back to the text flowchart slide, which is the slide I'm on, that Renate asked for. Okay, sure. Yeah, absolutely, I can. There's lots of ways to store data. A database is a really good mechanism to store data. If you think about how you have multiple databases today, but do you want to open those databases? Does it have the ability to allow multiple people to write it? Could you govern the access to that database? Do you want to be able to give that database access in such a way where you're giving some parts of the access to some folks, essentially ensuring transactional integrity that's immutable, can't be changed, and is highly secure, right? And so if you think about it, the reason for doing this is not all applications are appropriate for blockchain. And this allows you to be very critical about thinking just because the technology exists doesn't mean we should use it, and really go through a critical process by which you can eliminate whether blockchain makes sense. I hope that answered your question, Renee. Good question. That's a good question. So the other question from Donald is, how would libraries be able to share blockchains? What about data duplication? So the way it works today is you would have people hosting multiple servers. Each library would contribute one server, any number of servers that would basically create the initial blockchain. As data gets integrated into the blockchain, and as folks are putting the data into it, each one has their own representation of data. Is data duplicated? So if you have the same book in two places, absolutely. But it's not quite the same book. It may have a different ISBN number. It may have different things. And our ability to link that data, because of it, there's no problem in having duplicate data. It's what we do with the duplicate data and how we present the data. There's duplicate data already existing in multiple systems today. What do we need to do to sort of amalgamate the data to create one representational view? That's the question. Because you could have a book in multiple libraries, but that's okay, because all those libraries have those books. Does that answer your question, Donald? More or less. I think that's right. Jason, thank you for that. Data duplication is a feature, not a bug. Deduping could be part of the consensus algorithm. Absolutely. This is perfect. This is the exact use case that I alluded to towards the end. What impact does this have for libraries wanting to use the universal catalog? This is the seeding of that universal catalog by libraries for libraries that allows you to essentially have the data federated in a manner and creating a universal catalog that could be referenced with a lot of integrity. And great question by Chris. Oh, excellent. Another good question by John Treyrays. If you're planning on putting marked records into a blockchain and it is permanent, what happens when a marked record? This is so I'll answer, and Renee also had another question. So let me ask you. It doesn't matter. It is permanent, and the data stays, and now you have a historical record. It's like a website. You had a page, and now the page changed, and each iteration of the page remains, right, in the blockchain. But you are only referencing the most latest iteration. But should you need to go back to what the previous iterations was, you would be able to see that, right? Do you see libraries starting off with private chain? I think so. I might be. I'm maybe over calibrating on the private blockchain. It might be a public-private blockchain. It's really hard to say, but I think there needs to be a library-initiated blockchain, and whether you have a vendor managing the server, that's a different issue. But I think having libraries own the blockchain absolutely makes total sense. And the exact mechanics, I think private or public-private or some hybrid thereof, with sort of custom code written that will determine how the consensus algorithms will be. This will be a sort of a forum of libraries that get together and decide what makes sense for them. And this way, inviting the libraries owning the blockchain and inviting vendors and other libraries to participate in the blockchain, I definitely see that. Are there any concerns using commercial software created by a private company? A lot of the blockchain software is public domain today. If there are any changes and things like that that any commercial software company or a private company would make, you know, that's part and parcel, but they would do it under the auspices and guidance of a particular customer. I think IBM has a blockchain, Microsoft has a blockchain, and you know, Google has all of the big software companies now have a commercial software offering for blockchain, and I think the problem is the keys that you have are yours. And so fundamentally the underlying technology is key driven, I don't see a problem. I mean, that's like using Gmail and some of the other types of technology. I don't see a problem. Liz, I hope that answers your question. I think there's, oh, sorry, the questions are coming in. I know I can't even catch up with the questions.
The next question after Liz's is from Kalechi. What are the challenges so far for?
Kalechi. What are the challenges so far for libraries? Yeah, I see that. You know, I think the challenges will be, you know, thankfully there is some level of federal funding which we're looking at. I think the fundamental, it's anything like any project, you need to start, right? And I think if we debate the starting point, that's going to really, but you need to start. And I think even a small start and an incremental start by a few libraries will be the biggest thing. And I think that's the biggest hurdle, is getting alignment with all the people. Thank you, Jason. Yep, those are pretty much every major tech company, which further is an affirmation of the blockchain technology stack, right? The fact that IBM, Microsoft, Amazon are all betting on it is an affirmation that the technology is maturing really fast and much faster than some of the other technologies. And I think we'll get to that adoption curve very soon. The question will be, what role do libraries want to play in it? I want to thank Jason Griffey. He introduced, you know, the reason he was there, and thank you, Jason, for being helpful. Very, very appreciated.